עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה ותומכיה מאושר תרחיה דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה שלום.
Shalom. Our Torah portion this week is Kedoshim, and it opens with chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus. Let's see what it says in the Hebrew. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe limor, daber el kol adat bnei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem, Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. The Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Eternal, your God, am holy." As you can see, this week's Torah portion has a lot to do with holiness. By its very name, you know that this Torah portion tells us how to achieve a measure of holiness in our lives. Holiness, Kedusha, is a difficult concept for us moderns. How do we achieve holiness in our lives? Now, there are some who might suggest that to find true holiness, we have to remove ourselves from this mundane world, that we should go out someplace and live a monastic life, cut off from the world and from other people. This Torah portion says that is not the way that you find holiness. Rashi points out that there are these words in this week's Torah portion, at the opening that I just read, that might seem superfluous. Many times God speaks to Moses saying, "Speak to the Israelites," but here it says, "Speak to the entire assembly," or the entire congregation of the Israelites, Kol Adat B'nei Yisrael. And he says, this is to tell us that holiness is to be found in the community. It is to be found in the social aspect of life in this world. Judaism, and we can see it through reading this Torah portion, Judaism sees holiness as being found in the community, being found in the complex and sometimes very difficult circumstances of family. Holiness can be found in our business dealings with each other and in our intimate relationships with each other. What are the sorts of laws, sorts of mitzvot that we find in this week's Torah portion? We're told to revere our parents. We are told to be scrupulously honest with each other, not just telling the truth, but telling the whole truth, and never to misrepresent ourselves or our merchandise in the marketplace. We are told to be fair with those whom we might be in a position to judge, not showing favoritism to the rich, or even, for that matter, to the poor. We're commanded to treat non-Jews with the same dignity, the same fairness, and the same compassion that we are commanded to treat other Jews with. We are told that it is important to show even a greater measure of compassion to people in need than would be suggested by merely giving them what they need. The Torah tells us in this portion that when we harvest our fields, we are to leave the edges of the field ungleaned or unharvested, that people can come in the dark of night and pick what they need, so as not to be humiliated before us, those of us fortunate enough to have something extra to give them. As you can see, Parshat Kedoshim teaches us that holiness is found in this world when we, to the best of our ability, follow the commandments and to expand the commandments through the compassion of our hearts and our sense of justice and fairness in this world. There's a story about a rabbi and a philosopher who were having a conversation one day. And they were talking about God, whether God exists or not. Now, the rabbi was absolutely assured that God existed. Now, the philosopher accepted some of the rabbi's proofs that God existed, but he was annoyed when the rabbi refused to accept any of the evidence that perhaps God didn't exist. And when it was time to part company at the end of the day, the rabbi turned to the philosopher and he said, "You know, there's a possibility that you are a greater man than I am." The philosopher was surprised by this statement. He said, "How can I be a greater man than you, Rabbi?" The rabbi said, "You know, you think about God all of the time. You know, you're not sure whether God exists, but you think about God all of the time. Not so much with me. You know, I think more about myself, quite frankly. I think about the people around me. I think about mundane things. I think about the world. That's what I think about. But you think about God all of the time." Well, the philosopher felt complimented by the rabbi, and he thanked the rabbi for his remarks, and he went home. And for a number of years, he thought back about, ever so often he would think back on what the rabbi said. And then finally, the implications of what the rabbi said to him dawned on the philosopher. He said, "You know, the rabbi insulted me. He insulted me. He implied that, you know, I know that I exist. I don't know whether God exists, but I know that I exist. He, on the other hand, is so sure that God exists, he questions whether he exists. And he questions what his place in the world is. He asks the question, the rabbi asks the question, why am I here? Why am I here, and what is the meaning of my life? That's the essential question that Parshat Kedoshim raises. That is the Jewish approach to holiness. To find our place in the world. To find our reason for existence in this world. And our reason for existence in this world, according to the Torah, is to live the best we can by God's Word, to follow the mitzvot, to follow the wisdom of the Torah to the best degree that we can, and to somehow bring God's holiness into this world. That is the meaning of holiness in our religious tradition. Well, I hope that you will read Parshat Kedoshim and come to your own conclusions. Shabbat Shalom.
Nativo